The mansion owner looked me straight in the eye and said, "Stay outside. Use the back entrance. Don't let me catch you near the front door again." I nodded, swallowed the humiliation, and walked around to the servants' entrance like I'd done 100 times before. I was invisible to her, just another faceless immigrant cleaning her marble floors and polishing her silver. But everything changed the day I found her 8-year-old son crying in the garden, shivering in the cold, telling me his mother forgot to feed him again. I didn't shout, I didn't confront her. I just made a quiet decision that would bring her perfect world crashing down. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I came to this country 12 years ago with my 6-year-old daughter and 2 suitcases. We left everything behind, a house, family, memories, because staying meant watching my daughter grow up with no future. The American dream. That's what they call it, right? It sounds so clean, so hopeful, like something from a movie poster. But no one tells you about the first year when you sleep on a friend's couch in a neighborhood where sirens are the lullaby. No one mentions the nights you cry in the shower so your daughter won't hear, whispering to yourself that you made the right choice, trying to believe it through the doubt that eats at you like acid. No one talks about the weight of being invisible, how it feels to walk into a room and watch people look through you like you're made of glass. I worked 3 jobs at first, cleaning offices at night, the kind where you're alone with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the smell of industrial cleaner burning your nostrils, babysitting during the day for families who'd hand me their children but never learn my name, and washing dishes on weekends at a restaurant where the chef screamed in English and Spanish, somehow managing to insult everyone equally. My hands were raw, cracked, and bleeding at the knuckles. My back ached in a way that made getting out of bed feel like climbing a mountain. I was 33 years old and felt 70. But my daughter had food. Not fancy food, not organic, not the kind of meals I used to make back home with fresh ingredients from the market, but food, rice, beans, chicken when I could afford it. She had clothes, even if they came from thrift stores and smelled faintly of mothballs, no matter how many times I washed them. And she had a school that didn't smell like mold, where teachers smiled at her and told her she was smart, capable, destined for something better. That was enough. That had to be enough. Because if I let myself think about what I'd left behind, the family I might never see again, the life I'd built before everything fell apart, I'd drown in it. So I kept moving, one foot in front of the other, one shift after another. That's what you do when you're a mother. You survive. By the time I landed the job at the Harrington Mansion, I thought I'd made it. The pay was better than anything I'd had before, nearly double what I was making at the office cleaning job. The house was in one of those neighborhoods where the lawns look like paintings, every blade of grass the exact same height, every hedge trimmed into geometric perfection, the kind of place where even the mailboxes look expensive. Every car parked in every driveway cost more than I'd earn in 5 years, maybe 10. The first time I drove down that street, in my beat-up Honda with the check engine light permanently glowing, I felt like an imposter, like someone was going to pull me over and ask what I was doing there. Mrs. Victoria Harrington was the kind of woman you see in magazines, blonde hair that looked like spun gold, always perfectly styled even at 7 in the morning. Skin so smooth and tight it didn't seem real. Clothes that whispered money, the kind you can't fake. Cashmere sweaters in winter, linen in summer, pearls, always pearls. She was always smiling in photos, at charity galas, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, fundraisers for children's hospitals. In those pictures, she glowed. She looked kind, approachable, like someone who cared deeply about making the world better. In person, she was ice-wrapped in cashmere. Her eyes were cold, calculating, like she was constantly measuring everyone against some invisible standard and finding them lacking. On my first day, she stood in the foyer with her arms crossed, looking me up and down like I was a stain on her expensive Persian rug. I wore my best clothes, a simple black dress, sensible shoes, hair pulled back neatly. I thought I looked professional, but the way she looked at me made me feel like I'd shown up in rags. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice smooth but sharp, like a knife wrapped in silk. "You will use the back entrance, always. You will not touch the furniture in the main rooms unless you're cleaning it. You will not look at the art. You will not answer the phone. You will not speak unless I ask you a direct question. And even then, keep it brief. You are here to work, not to exist. Understand?" I nodded. My throat felt tight. What else could I do? I needed that job. My daughter needed new glasses. The rent was due in a week. My car was making a sound that mechanics describe as expensive. So I nodded and said, "Yes, ma'am." "Good," she said, turning away like I'd already ceased to exist. "The back door is through the side gate. I'll expect you here by 7 every morning. Don't be late." She walked away, her heels clicking on the marble floor, the sound echoing through the enormous entryway like a countdown. I stood there for a moment, alone in that grand foyer with its chandelier that probably cost more than my entire life. And I felt small, smaller than I'd felt in years. But I swallowed that feeling, turned around, and went to find the back entrance. That's what you do when you're invisible. You adapt. The mansion was enormous. 6 bedrooms, each one bigger than my entire apartment. A library with floor-to-ceiling shelves holding more books than I'd ever seen in my life. Leather-bound volumes that looked like they'd never been opened. A kitchen bigger than most restaurants, with appliances that gleamed like jewelry. Marble countertops that felt cold even in summer, and a sub-zero refrigerator that cost as much as a car. There was a pool, Olympic-sized, with a separate hot tub and a pool house that had its own bathroom and kitchenette. A tennis court with perfect white lines, and a garden that looked like it belonged in a movie. Roses and lavender and pathways lined with smooth stones, benches positioned at artful angles, fountains that ran 24 hours a day. Everything was perfect, pristine, controlled down to the millimeter. The throw pillows on the couches were arranged in a specific pattern. The flowers in the vases were changed every 3 days. Even the towels in the bathrooms were folded in a way that looked more like sculpture than function. It was beautiful, undeniably beautiful. But it didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum, cold, untouchable. A place where you weren't supposed to breathe too loudly or leave fingerprints, except for one thing, Ethan, Mrs. Harrington's son. He was 8 years old, small for his age, with dark hair that always looked like it needed a trim, and eyes that seemed too sad for a child. Serious eyes, the kind that made you wonder what he'd seen, what he'd learned to accept, that no child should have to accept. I noticed him the first week. While I vacuumed the living room, he'd sit in the corner, cross-legged on the floor, reading a book. Always reading, never making a sound, never asking for anything. He didn't run around like kids usually do. He didn't jump on furniture or leave toys scattered across the floor. He didn't laugh or shout or play. He was a ghost in his own home. At first, I thought maybe he was just shy. Some kids are. They take time to warm up to strangers, prefer quiet over chaos. But then I started noticing other things. Small things that added up to something deeply wrong. His clothes were often wrinkled, sometimes dirty, like they hadn't been washed in days. He wore the same shoes every day, scuffed white sneakers that were clearly too small. I could see his toes pressed against the tips when he walked, his gait slightly awkward because his feet didn't fit properly. Once, I saw him limping slightly. When I asked if he was okay, he said his shoes hurt, but it was fine. He'd get new ones eventually. Eventually. That word stuck with me. He was always alone. No friends ever came over, no birthday parties, no sleepovers, no noise. Just silence, heavy and oppressive, like a blanket thrown over something you're not supposed to see. I'd hear other staff members talk sometimes, quietly, when Mrs. Harrington wasn't around. "That kid's too quiet," the cook said once. "It's not normal." The gardener nodded. "I never see him play. Just sits and reads, or stares. Kids shouldn't stare like that, like they've given up." One afternoon in mid-September, Mrs. Harrington hosted a luncheon for her charity group, Women for Tomorrow's Children. The irony of the name wasn't lost on me then, and it certainly isn't now. A dozen women arrived in designer dresses, heels that cost more than I made in a month, handbags with logos I recognized from magazines. They sipped wine, expensive bottles I'd been instructed to open exactly 30 minutes before serving. They talked about fundraising strategies, about underprivileged children who needed mentors, about the importance of giving back to the community. Their voices floated through the house like music, light and cheerful, full of purpose. I served them salads, arugula with pears and candied walnuts, dressing on the side. I refilled glasses. I smiled when they didn't look at me, which was most of the time. Once one of them asked me to bring more bread. She didn't say please. She didn't say thank you when I returned. She just took the basket and continued her conversation about a silent auction she was organizing. I didn't exist. I was a function, not a person. After they left, the house felt hollow. The dining room smelled like perfume and wine, a sickly sweet combination that made my stomach turn. I was clearing plates, scraping half-eaten food into the trash, when I heard something, a sound that didn't belong, a low rumble, organic, human. I paused, listening. There it was again. I followed the sound to the back patio. Ethan was sitting on the stone steps, staring at the ground. He wore a thin t-shirt, even though the air had turned cold, the kind of cold that bites at your skin and makes you want to curl up inside. His stomach growled so loudly I heard it from 10 feet away. I walked closer, setting the tray of dirty dishes on a nearby table. "Ethan?" He looked up, startled, like he'd forgotten anyone else existed in the world. "Did you eat lunch?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. He shook his head, then looked away like he was embarrassed. "Mom said I had to wait until after her event, but she forgot." The words hit me like a punch. My chest tightened. I glanced back toward the kitchen, toward the dining room where trays of untouched food still sat on the sideboard. Salmon with lemon and dill, roasted vegetables that looked like art, fancy little pastries filled with chocolate and cream, enough to feed 20 people, maybe 30. And this child was sitting here, hungry, his stomach eating itself, because his mother forgot. "Come on," I said quietly. "Let's get you something to eat." He looked up at me with wide eyes, brown and deep and so full of hope, it broke something inside me. "Really? Really, sweetheart, come on." I led him to the small staff kitchen, the one in the back where the real workers ate, not the showpiece kitchen where Mrs. Harrington posed for Instagram photos. I sat him down at the worn table and turned on the small space heater in the corner. Then I made him a plate, not the fancy leftovers from the luncheon. I didn't want him to feel like he was eating scraps, even though technically that's what they were. Instead, I made him a simple sandwich, turkey and cheese on soft bread, the way my daughter liked hers. I cut it into triangles, added some baby carrots, sliced an apple into thin pieces, and poured him a glass of cold milk. He stared at the plate like I'd handed him treasure. Then he ate. Not quickly, not frantically, but steadily, methodically, like someone who'd learned to savor every bite because they never knew when the next meal would come. I watched him, my heart aching in a way I couldn't fully explain. When he finished, he wiped his mouth with a napkin and looked at me. "Thank you," he whispered. His voice was so small, so careful, like he was afraid that saying it too loudly would make the kindness disappear. "You're welcome. Sweetheart, you can come find me anytime you're hungry, okay? Promise?" He hesitated, then nodded. His eyes filled with something I recognized, relief mixed with disbelief, like he wanted to trust me but didn't quite know how. From that day on, I made sure to check on him whenever I could. I'd bring him snacks, ask how he was doing, sit with him for a few minutes when Mrs. Harrington wasn't around. He started to open up. He told me about the books he liked, the games he used to play before his dad started traveling all the time, the way his mom used to tuck him in at night before she got busy with all her events. "Now she doesn't," he said quietly one day. "She says I'm old enough to put myself to bed." He was 8. If you've ever felt invisible, you know what it's like. You walk into a room and people look through you, not at you. You speak and no one hears. You exist in the margins, useful when needed, forgotten the rest of the time. That was my life for years. I cleaned the homes of people who never learned my name. I cared for children who called me the nanny lady. Instead of asking who I was, I smiled and said thank you when they tipped me $5 after I'd spent 8 hours scrubbing their bathrooms. I told myself it was temporary, that one day I'd have enough saved to go back to school, get a better job, build something stable for my daughter and me. But life has a way of keeping you in place. Rent is due, the car breaks down, your daughter needs new shoes, and suddenly, temporary becomes permanent. The Harrington job was supposed to be different, better pay, steadier hours. But the humiliation was the same, maybe worse, because Mrs. Harrington didn't just ignore me. She made sure I knew my place. Once, I accidentally walked through the front hallway because I'd forgotten something in the kitchen. She appeared out of nowhere, her heels clicking on the marble like a warning. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut. I thought I made myself clear. I stammered an apology, explained I was just getting something from the kitchen. She didn't care. "That door is not for you. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good, because if I see you using it again, you'll be looking for a new job." I nodded and hurried away, my face burning. That night I told my daughter about it. She was 13 by then, old enough to understand. "Mommy, why do you stay there?" she asked. "Because we need the money, Mija, but she treats you like trash." "I know." "Then why?" I looked at her, this fierce, beautiful girl who deserved so much more than I could give her, and I said, "Because one day you'll go to college. You'll have opportunities I never had. And if I have to be invisible for a few more years so you can be seen, then that's what I'll do." She hugged me tight and didn't say anything else, but I could feel her anger, her frustration, her love. It fueled me. I went back the next day, and the day after that, and kept going because that's what you do when you're a mother. But Ethan Ethan was different. He didn't choose to be invisible. He was a child, and the more I watched, the more I realized something was very wrong. The day everything shifted was a Tuesday in late October. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that bites at your skin. I arrived at the mansion early, let myself in through the back door, and started my usual routine. I was in the kitchen, scrubbing the counters, when I heard it. A sound so faint I almost missed it. A sob, quiet, muffled. I paused, listening. There it was again. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped outside, following the sound to the far corner of the garden. That's where I found him. Ethan. He was curled up behind a row of hedges, his knees pulled to his chest, his thin jacket soaked from the morning dew. His lips were pale, his hands were shaking. Oh my God! I rushed over, kneeling beside him. Ethan, what are you doing out here? It's freezing. He looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. I didn't want to bother anyone, he whispered. Why are you out here, sweetheart? Where's your mom? She left. Where did she go? A breakfast meeting. She said she'd be back by noon. What time did she leave? He shrugged. Before the sun came up. My stomach dropped. It was barely 8 in the morning. He'd been out here for hours. Did you eat breakfast? He shook his head. She forgot. Again. I didn't ask permission. I didn't think. I just scooped him up. He was so light, too light, and carried him inside. I sat him down in the small staff kitchen, turned on the heater, and wrapped him in a blanket I kept in my bag. Then I made him hot chocolate and toast with butter and jam. He ate slowly, his hands still trembling. Thank you, he said again. You don't have to thank me, I said. But you need to tell me the truth. How often does this happen? He didn't answer right away. He just stared into his mug. A lot, he finally said. She forgets. My heart broke. Not the dramatic kind of heartbreak you see in movies. This was quiet, heavy, the kind that settles in your chest and stays there. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake Mrs. Harrington and ask how she could do this to her own child. But I didn't. Instead, I sat with Ethan until he stopped shivering, until the color came back to his face, until he smiled just a little when I told him a silly joke my daughter used to love. Before I left that day, I made him promise to come find me if he ever needed help. Anything, okay? Even if it's just to talk. He nodded. Promise. And then, so quietly, I almost didn't hear it. You're the only one who cares. That sentence haunted me all night. I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing his face, those sad eyes, that tiny voice. The only one who cares. What kind of life was that for a child? What kind of mother forgets to feed her son? The next morning, I decided to pay closer attention. Not just to Ethan, but to everything. And what I found made my blood run cold. Have you ever been in a house that looks perfect on the outside but feels wrong on the inside? That was the Harrington mansion. Every surface gleamed. Every painting hung perfectly straight. Fresh flowers in crystal vases, but underneath all that polish was rot. I started noticing things I'd overlooked before, or maybe I'd just been too tired to see. Ethan's school backpack sat in the same spot for weeks, untouched. When I asked him about school, he said his mom told him he'd be homeschooled this year. Who's teaching you? No one yet. She's looking for a tutor. That was in early September. By late October, no tutor had appeared. Ethan wasn't learning anything. He spent his days reading old books from the library, drawing pictures, or wandering the garden alone. He had no friends, no schedule, no structure, just emptiness. His room was another shock. I wasn't supposed to clean it. Mrs. Harrington handled the upstairs herself, or so she claimed. But one day, she asked me to bring up a load of laundry. I knocked on Ethan's door. No answer. I opened it slowly. The room was freezing. The heater vent was closed, sealed with tape. His bed was unmade, the sheets thin and worn. There were no toys, no posters, just a small desk, a lamp, and a pile of books. It looked like a cell, not a child's bedroom. I found Ethan in the garden later that afternoon. "Why is your room so cold?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He shrugged. "The heater's broken." "When did it break?" "A while ago." "Did your mom call someone to fix it?" He didn't answer. That was answer enough. I went back inside, furious but silent. I found the main thermostat in the hallway. The rest of the house was set to 72 degrees. Ethan's room was manually turned off. Not broken, turned off. Why? Why would a mother do that to her child? I asked the other staff members, the gardener, the part-time cook, if they'd noticed anything strange. Most of them shrugged. "It's not our business," the cook said, but one of the gardeners, an older man named Carlos, pulled me aside. "You see it too, don't you?" "See what?" "The boy." "He's not okay." "No, he's not." Carlos shook his head. "I've worked here for 3 years. It's gotten worse. Mrs. Harrington used to care, or at least pretend to. But ever since the husband started traveling, she's changed. It's like she resents the kid." "Why?" Carlos looked around, making sure no one was listening. "Money problems. I've heard her on the phone. She's in debt, bad debt. The kind you don't talk about at charity luncheons." That conversation stuck with me. Debt, resentment, a child being erased in his own home. But it still didn't make sense. Mrs. Harrington had everything. The mansion, the cars, the designer clothes. How could she be in debt? A few days later, I found part of the answer. I was dusting the office, a room I wasn't usually allowed in, but Mrs. Harrington had left for the day and told me to give it a quick clean. I was careful, methodical. I didn't touch anything I wasn't supposed to. But then I saw a stack of papers on the desk, half hidden under a magazine. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. But something told me I needed to. Court documents, custody petitions, divorce filings. I scanned them quickly, my heart pounding. Mr. Harrington was filing for full custody of Ethan. He claimed Mrs. Harrington was mentally unstable, financially irresponsible, and neglectful. There were emails, printed and highlighted, messages from teachers, concerned neighbors, even family members, all of them saying the same thing. Something is wrong. The child needs help. Mrs. Harrington's responses were cold, defensive. She denied everything, claimed people were jealous, trying to ruin her reputation, but the evidence was damning. Ethan missed doctor's appointments. He hadn't been enrolled in school. He was losing weight, and she'd been using his trust fund, money left to him by his grandparents, to pay her personal debts. I felt sick. This wasn't just neglect. It was calculated. She was keeping Ethan hidden, isolated because if anyone saw him, if anyone asked questions, she'd lose everything, the custody, the house, the image, so she made him invisible. I put the papers back exactly as I'd found them and left the office, my hands shaking. That night, I couldn't eat. I sat at my tiny kitchen table, staring at the wall while my daughter did her homework beside me. "Mommy, are you okay?" "I don't know." "Mija." "What's wrong?" I turned to her. "If you saw a child being hurt, would you say something? Even if it meant losing your job?" She looked at me, her face serious. "You taught me to always do the right thing. even when it's hard. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I did. So that's your answer. She was right. But doing the right thing in theory and doing it in practice are two very different things. If I reported Mrs. Harrington, I'd lose my job. I'd lose my income. I might even get blacklisted from other housekeeping jobs. People like the Harringtons have power. They have connections. I was no one. But Ethan was a child, and he was suffering. The decision wasn't easy, but it was clear. The breaking point came a week later. It was a Thursday evening. Mrs. Harrington had gone to another event, some gala downtown. I was finishing up in the kitchen when I heard a knock at the back door. Soft, hesitant. I opened it. Ethan stood there, soaked to the bone. It was pouring rain, the kind that drenches you in seconds. His clothes clung to his skin. His hair was plastered to his forehead. He was shaking violently. Ethan, what are you doing? Come inside. I pulled him in, grabbed a towel, and wrapped it around him. What happened? Did you walk here? He nodded, his teeth chattering. From the mansion? That was 3 miles away, in the rain, in the dark. Why? Why did you leave? He looked up at me, his eyes filled with tears. She locked me out. What? I locked myself out. By accident. I was in the garden and the door shut behind me. I tried to knock, but she wasn't home. I waited, but no one came. So I walked here. My blood turned to ice. You walked 3 miles in the rain because you had nowhere else to go? He nodded. I'm sorry. I didn't know where else to go. Don't apologize. You did the right thing. I brought him to my apartment. It wasn't much. A small 2-bedroom in a part of town Mrs. Harrington would probably never visit. But it was warm. It was safe. I gave him dry clothes, made him soup, and put him on the couch with a blanket. My daughter sat with him, offering him her stuffed bear. He fell asleep holding it. That night, as I watched him sleep, small and fragile and finally at peace, I made my decision. I couldn't send him back. Not yet. Not without doing something. The next morning, I called Child Protective Services. My hands shook as I dialed. My voice shook as I spoke. But I told them everything. The neglect, the isolation, the locked room, the unpaid bills, the custody battle. I gave them the address. I gave them my name. And then I waited. 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Harrington. Her voice was shrill, hysterical. Where is he? Where is my son? He's safe. You had no right. He showed up at my door in the rain. He walked 3 miles because you locked him out. That was an accident. An accident you didn't notice for hours. You're going to regret this. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Maybe not. But I know who Ethan is, and he deserves better than you. I hung up. My hands were still shaking, but my voice had been steady, strong. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. What happened next unfolded faster than I expected. Within 2 days, investigators showed up at the Harrington mansion. They interviewed staff members. They searched Ethan's room. They reviewed his medical records or the lack thereof. They spoke to neighbors, teachers, family members. The evidence was overwhelming. Mrs. Harrington tried to fight it. She hired lawyers. She called in favors. She spun stories about jealous employees and misunderstandings. But the truth was louder than her lies. Ethan was placed in temporary custody with his paternal aunt, a kind woman who lived 2 hours away. She'd been trying to reach him for months, but Mrs. Harrington had blocked her calls, returned her letters unopened. When the aunt came to pick him up, she cried. "Thank you," she said to me. "You saved him." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. A week later, Mrs. Harrington lost temporary custody. A month after that, the divorce was finalized. Mr. Harrington was granted full custody. The mansion was put up for sale to pay off debts. Mrs. Harrington's perfect life, the one she'd built on appearances and charity galas and Instagram posts, crumbled in a matter of weeks. Some people said I destroyed a family. Others said I was a hero. I didn't feel like either. I just felt tired and relieved. 6 months passed. I found a new job, better pay, better hours, working for a family that treated me like a human being. My daughter got accepted into a program for gifted students. Life moved forward. Then one day, a letter arrived. The return address was unfamiliar. I opened it carefully. Inside was a drawing, a garden, colorful and bright, a woman standing in the middle, smiling, and a boy next to her, holding her hand. At the bottom, in careful handwriting, "Thank you for seeing me. Love, Ethan." I hung that drawing on my refrigerator. It's still there, and every time I see it, I remember something important. Being invisible doesn't mean you're powerless. Sometimes the people no one notices are the ones who change everything. Mrs. Harrington told me to stay outside, to know my place, to be invisible. But I refused, not for myself, for a child who had no voice. And in the end, that quiet refusal was louder than all her screaming. So what do you think? Have you ever seen someone suffering and pretended not to notice because it was easier that way? Have you ever been invisible or made someone else feel that way? Let me know in the comments. And if this story moved you, please subscribe to this channel. There are so many more stories like this. Real stories about real people fighting for dignity, for justice, for the ones who can't fight for themselves. Thank you for listening. And remember, you're never as invisible as you think.